Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan first.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So I take it you're taking your last.
I hope that's
Deputy
not
Wallace.
out of my time, Deputy Wallace. Give it to me. Right, okay.
I take
Anyway,
your last, Deputy Wallace.
turning to the issue that migration is going to be discussed at the Council meeting, and it's in relation to the implementation of the comprehensive approach to migration. And I have to ask, does that comprehensive approach include the increasing securitisation agenda when it comes to migration? Because I think that's really, it's undermining, it's certainly threatening the EU aid budget, because there is a fear of considerable funding going to the securitisation agenda. And that Fortress Europe image, I think, is damaging to the founding principles of the EU. And I think there's undeniable hypocrisy in President Tusk's recent statement after the last Salzburg summit, when he said, we may not agree on everything, but we agree that the main goal is stemming illegal migration to Europe, because it's European policies, EU policies, and the actions of certain countries that created the reasons why people are migrating. Issues like the arms sales, like tax measures and unfair trade treaties. They're the factors that are keeping those countries impoverished, which leads to migration. And Europe will talk about tackling the root causes of migration, but it's much easier to put up the barriers. And that's also losing sight of the fact that there's far more internal migration within Africa than there is from Africa outside. President Tusk also spoke about cooperation with third countries, but some of those third countries, we look at Libya, a failed state, and we look at a country like Turkey with very questionable human rights agenda. There's another item on the agenda, which is preparation for the upcoming summit with the League of Arab States. Yemen has to be the main item in that summit. The conflict since 2011, 7-year conflict in a country that had so many challenges, even without a war. This war, it's not about Yemen. It's about a power struggle between Saudi Arabia, backed by the US, and what they see as Iranian influence and support for the Houthi rebels. And while the peace talks are happening, there's been very little condemnation of the war, the attacks on civilians, the starvation and the malnutrition. And we know about the lucrative arms deals. One statistic, French defence contractors delivered $2 billion in equipment to Saudi Arabia. The first half of 2017, arms sales from the UK to Saudi Arabia, $1.25 billion. And while Germany has stopped selling arms to that conflict, there's questions over their motives, that the arms industry is not as vital to German GDP as it is to France's and to France and Britain. It appears that the EU's economic relationship with Saudi Arabia is more important. And we know the wealth among the Arab countries, and surely there is a moral obligation on them to stop fuelling a conflict that has had such consequences for the population, and to step up with humanitarian aid. And it's reckoned that it's more than 60% of deaths in Yemen were caused by the Saudi airstrikes. And if there could be something on the South Sudan, nearly 5 years there now of a civil war, 50% of the population in need of humanitarian aid, and millions displaced. They're now on their 12th peace deal, very fragile, and I think there is a role for the international community, for the EU, to ensure that this 12th peace deal lasts. You know, for the EU to play a role with those who are genuinely committed to reconciliation and sustainable peace. You know, giving the aid in Ireland has been very forthcoming, that's vital, but more challenging and equally vital is Ireland, through the EU, ensuring the peace holds. And then finally, regardless of the views and our relationship with the Spanish government, there is the fact that there is support for Catalan independence, and there is the fact that there are 2 Catalan civil society leaders, 7 Catalan politicians, including a former Speaker of the Parliament, and a number of Catalan politicians in exile across Europe. And while it is an internal matter, I think the EU could be more proactive, trying to prevent an escalation of unrest in one of its member countries.